Something is happening in the waters of the Persian Gulf that has not been seen since the early days of the Iraq War. Not since the spring of 2003, when American armored columns crossed into Mesopotamia under a sky thick with smoke and helicopter rotors, has the United States assembled a force of this composition, this scale, and this obvious intent in the Middle East. What began on February 28, 2026 as a joint American-Israeli air campaign has quietly, methodically, and with stunning speed evolved into something far more dangerous, a building ground force converging from opposite ends of the globe, pointed directly at the Islamic Republic of Iran. What began on February 28th as a joint U.S.-Israeli air campaign targeting Iran's military infrastructure has now, by the final week of March, expanded into the largest deployment of soldiers to the region since the Iraq War. The operation has been given a name, Operation Epic Fury. And the name alone tells you something about the ambition behind it. This is not a surgical strike. This is not a proportional response. This is a campaign, systematic, escalating, and unfinished. The Pentagon is putting together plans for weeks of ground operations in Iran, citing multiple U.S. officials, suggesting ground operations could involve both conventional infantry and special operations elements, but would not yet rise to the level of a full-scale invasion. That distinction, not a full-scale invasion, is one worth pausing on because it is the kind of language that has a way of changing very rapidly once boots meet ground, once missiles start flying back, and once the fog of war replaces the clarity of planning. To understand what is about to happen, you have to understand the forces now in motion. The first formation is the Tripoli Amphibious Ready Group, centered on the America-class assault ship USS Tripoli and the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, ordered out of Sasebo, Japan on March 13th. The group transited the Strait of Malacca and was at Diego Garcia in the British Indian Ocean Territory by March 23rd. At 261 meters long and weighing 45,000 tons, the USS Tripoli is not merely a ship. It is a floating invasion platform capable of operating as a light aircraft carrier while simultaneously deploying amphibious assault vehicles and Marines directly onto a hostile coastline. The sailors and Marines of the 31st MEU arrived in the CENTCOM region on March 27th, along with transport and strike fighter aircraft, as well as amphibious assault and tactical assets. The second formation arrived from the opposite direction. Around 2,500 Marines from the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, nicknamed the Pride of the Pacific, are on their way from California with the USS Boxer. The Boxer is a Wasp-class amphibious assault ship that carries F-35B Lightning II jets capable of vertical takeoff and landing, aircraft that can operate from a ship deck and transition almost instantly into close air support for troops on the ground. Together, the two Marine groups offer the U.S. approximately 4,500 Marines and sailors in the region. That is not a deterrent posture. That is an assault package, but the Marines are only part of the picture. The 82nd Airborne Division's Quick Reaction Brigade is being eyed for a possible deployment tied to operations in Iran. No final order has been issued, but prudent planning was underway, senior defense officials told the New York Times. The 82nd Airborne is not a garrison force or a peacekeeping unit. It is the Army's Rapid Spear. The Fort Bragg-based brigade can be deployed anywhere in the world in under 24 hours and serves as the Army's emergency response force. When the 82nd moves, it means someone has already decided that speed will matter more than preparation time. On Friday, an Iranian missile and drone attack injured a dozen U.S. service members at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. 2 of the 12 injuries were considered serious. The strike also damaged multiple U.S. aircraft, including an E-3 Sentry AWACS and multiple KC-135 tankers. 13 service members have been killed in action and nearly 300 wounded during Operation Epic Fury. These are not statistics from a distant conflict. These are Americans dying in a war that much of the public has barely begun to process. The United States already has 50,000 troops deployed across the Middle East, but most of them are not infantry units designed to invade a country. Marine Expeditionary Units are different. A MEU is a self-contained combat force. It brings its own aviation, logistics, intelligence, and firepower. It can storm a beach. It can seize an airfield. It can hold territory under fire while heavier forces arrive. When military planners deploy two MEUs simultaneously from two different oceans to converge on the same theater at roughly the same time, they are not doing that by accident. They are shaping conditions, and the condition they appear to be shaping is this: Karg Island. Karg Island is a strategic oil hub 15 miles offshore of Iran that processes 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. One strategy Trump is reportedly considering is its capture, with some officials believing that controlling the island would give the U.S. leverage over Iran to force it to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrow choke point through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil passes each day. The near-total halt of traffic through the strait since the conflict began has created a catastrophic disruption in oil markets. Crude oil prices have topped $110 per barrel and could climb further. Every day the strait stays closed, the global economy absorbs another shock. Every week the standoff continues. The pressure on the White House to do something decisive intensifies. Trump, who ordered a large bombing raid on Karg Island earlier this month, has described the location as Iran's crown jewel. Senator Lindsey Graham garnered headlines by favorably comparing a potential marine invasion of Karg to the Corps' famous assault on Iwo Jima during World War II, an assault that killed thousands of Marines. That comparison is either wildly reckless or deeply revealing, depending on your perspective. Iwo Jima was one of the bloodiest battles in American military history. Invoking it suggests that certain officials in Washington understand and appear willing to accept the casualty calculus that a physical assault on Iranian territory would demand. The risks are not theoretical. Although Karg Island has lost most of its defenses from U.S. bombardment, the troops stationed there would likely not have much protection from Iranian retaliation. Karg is only 15 miles off the coast of Iran. Troops would need considerable resources to hold it for a long period and would be under near constant bombardment from rockets, drones, and missiles in the waterway. Every military expert who has analyzed this scenario returns to the same conclusion. Seizing Karg is one thing. Holding it is another matter entirely. And then there is the nuclear question, the shadow that has hung over this entire campaign since the first bombs fell. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told a congressional briefing that the U.S. may need to physically secure nuclear material inside Iran, stating, "People are going to have to go and get it." Those 7 words represent a potential mission of staggering complexity and consequence. Physically securing nuclear material from inside a country actively at war with the United States would require special operations forces, intelligence support, and precise coordination in an environment where nothing is precise. It would also constitute a direct intrusion into Iranian sovereign territory in a way that no air campaign, however devastating, has yet accomplished. The IAEA's Director General told NPR that he believes parts of Iran's nuclear program will remain even after the heavy damage done by U.S. and Israeli military strikes, saying there has been enormous degradation of the physical facilities, but most probably the enrichment material and some infrastructure will still be there at the end of the conflict. That assessment transforms Rubio's statement from a rhetorical flourish into a potential operational directive. If the enrichment material is still there and the U.S. government believes it cannot be left there, then at some point someone has to go in and remove it. That is what Marines are for. Iran has rejected President Trump's plan for ending the war and presented 5 conditions of its own, including a complete end to aggression, concrete guarantees preventing the recurrence of war, and comprehensive guarantees across all fronts, including all resistance groups. Those conditions are not a negotiating position. They are a rejection. Tehran is signaling that it will not capitulate from the air campaign alone, that if Washington wants an end to this conflict on American terms, it will have to pay a price that bombs delivered from 30,000 feet cannot extract. Officials speaking to the Washington Post said discussions within the administration over the past month have touched upon the possible seizure of Karg Island and raids into other coastal areas near the Strait of Hormuz to find and destroy weapons that can target commercial and military shipping. One person said the objectives under consideration would probably take weeks, not months, to complete. Weeks, not months. That is a remarkably confident timeline for operations inside one of the most heavily defended coastal regions on Earth, a country that has spent decades preparing specifically for an American ground intrusion. An Iranian military source told Tasnim that Iran could open a new front at the mouth of the Red Sea if military action takes place on Iranian islands or anywhere else on Iranian lands, saying Iran can pose a credible threat in the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, which lies between Yemen and Djibouti. The Bab al-Mandeb, another choke point. Another artery of global commerce that could be severed with the right combination of missiles, mines, and Iranian proxy forces. The architecture of this conflict, if it expands, does not stay in the Persian Gulf. It spreads across every maritime lane that connects Asia, Africa, and Europe. Military experts interviewed by Time suggest that deploying 2 full Marine expeditionary units simultaneously signals something bigger is happening. A former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East noted, "Adding the 11th tells me there's something bigger afoot." To me, it indicates that somebody's planning to do something with these units and they need them both. That instinct, that experienced professional reading of force posture, is the most important piece of intelligence available right now. Not the White House statements about winding down, not the diplomatic signals about intermediaries carrying messages between Washington and Tehran, the ships, the Marines, the paratroopers, the timing. They all point in one direction. What happens next depends on a decision that has not yet been made, or at least not yet announced. Decisions on whether or not to greenlight ground operations, which would put U.S. troops at substantially more risk to Iranian threats, now rest with President Donald Trump. That is the fulcrum on which the next chapter of this crisis balances. One man's signature separates the current air campaign from something that will be written about for generations, an American amphibious assault on Iranian soil, the first since the Marines stormed the shores of Tripoli more than 2 centuries ago. The ships are in position. The Marines are ready. The 82nd Airborne is packed and waiting. The Pentagon has its plans. And somewhere in the waters between Diego Garcia and the mouth of the Persian Gulf, thousands of young Americans in uniform are sitting in the belly of warships, looking out at a horizon that is about to change everything.